This episode's called Yippee Mr. Customer. I poured her a glass of wine, but before she could take it from my hand, I jumped back, almost spilling it. She was startled, to say the least. I'm not sure what startled her the most, the fact that I jumped back like a lunatic, or that she thought she wasn't going to get the wine. I explained the incident without going into too much detail. My explanation was, sorry, it's just that a gang of crooks have threatened to kill me. I saw a red dot on my chest in a mirror, and I thought it was a laser-sighted firearm aimed at my heart. I could tell by her expression that wasn't really what she wanted to hear. I tried to make light of the situation, sat back down on the settee, and carried on watching the TV, as if it was an everyday occurrence in my life, and hoping she would forget. It wasn't a sniper about to pull the trigger, it was just a shaft of light refracting off the bezel of my Rolex and through the glass of Merlot that I was about to pass to her. My explanation seemed to do the trick, as she was pretty quiet for the rest of the night, but she did drink more than a fair share of Merlot. I'm pretty sure she just thought I'd watched too many movies, which in fairness I had. But that didn't mean I wasn't telling the truth. I hadn't known her very long, so I thought it was better not to go into too much detail and scare her off there and then. I'd just let matters take their natural course, as it usually took at least a couple of months before they got fed up with me. This incident wouldn't help matters at all, but over the years I hadn't changed for the better in any way whatsoever, so the chances that this one would turn into a long-term relationship were slim to zero. After all, I was getting on a bit, and none of my previous ones had. Later that night, it was my turn to be startled by her, when she let out a piercing scream and jumped out of bed. For reasons best known unto herself, she had put her arm under my pillow and felt the cold steel of my Beretta. No, that's not a euphemism. It's actually an Italian-made semi-automatic pistol, and in my opinion, it is to handguns what Ferrari is to supercars. I tried to calm her down by telling her it was the same gun that Mel Gibson used in the Lethal Weapon series. The gun overshadowed his acting and was the real star of the film. All the gun shops in America sold out within a few hours of the release of the movie. When I saw Mel unload a full clip and take out a sniper in a window, the top of an office block, I just had to have one too.
I'm still here, asshole! Shut up!
However, when she mumbled, "Why?" apparently what she'd actually meant was, why did I sleep with a loaded gun under my pillow? Not why had I bought it in the first place. She also added, "You moron," through gritted teeth. I thought that was very brave of her, particularly as I was now holding a loaded gun in my hand. Nothing but the full story was now going to shut her up. I'd like to stress that this was an extreme measure. I'm a law-abiding person, but I was genuinely in fear for my life. If they were going to come after me, I wasn't just going to roll over and die. I held a valid firearm certificate and I'm a very good shot. When not being transported to and from the gun club where I practiced combat shooting with pop-up targets, technically my stainless steel Beretta 92FS should have been locked up in my gun cabinet and not where it actually was when I was in bed, under my pillow, cocked and locked, with 15 9mm parabellum bullets in the magazine and another one up the spout in the firing chamber. But a gang had really threatened to kill me, and I'd taken their threat very seriously indeed. When I was outside of my house, I'd be a sitting duck, but to get at me inside my home, first of all, they'd have to find where I lived, and that would mean following me home from the garage. I was always very careful to make sure I wasn't being followed. I went to great lengths driving home via different routes, different directions, different times, in different cars, always keeping an eye on the cars behind me. If they did manage to find where I lived, to get me, they'd have to defeat my security system and get up my creaky stairs, avoiding the step with a hidden pressure pad, then get through my security locked bedroom door without waking me. If they woke me, I had a panic button by my bed. If that didn't frighten them off and they got through the door, then I'm afraid They would need to be bulletproof because there would be 16 high-velocity parabellum rounds heading in their direction. It was a last resort, but as I said, I did take their threat very, very seriously indeed. You're probably thinking that I'd have time to get my gun out if I heard an intruder downstairs. True, my gun safe was concealed in my bedroom, but it was not easy to get my gun out, as I'd made sure that no one would be able to steal a weapon of mine and use it to commit a crime. I would never be able to forgive myself if that happened. My gun was kept in a safe, within a safe. It was also wired to my house alarm's tamper circuit, which meant that even if my house alarm wasn't armed, the klaxon would go off immediately the safe was opened, or if someone tried to move it from the wall. The only way to open it was by entering first the alarm code, then the special engineer's code to take the system completely offline. I had contacted the police to ask for their help and advice, but the desk sergeant's response was something like, "Oh dear, that's not good, is it? But what do you expect me to do?" I took it from his attitude that putting me into a witness protection program was not something the Walton-le-Dale police force were familiar with. And my request for a new identity and relocation to a safe house in Miami with Sonny Crockett and Ricardo Tubbs guarding me fell on deaf ears. Parabellum, loosely translated, means prepare for war. I'm a parabellum kind of guy. I prefer a quiet life, but if it's war you want, I'm prepared for it. So, back to my explanation. It briefly crossed my mind to use the excuse that a friend of mine used to avoid any potentially awkward "we need to talks" with his girlfriend. Early on in their relationship, he'd confided in her that he was in the SAS, the Special Air Service, and there would be times when he was called away at a moment's notice. Whenever she suspected that he'd been up to no good, he would say that he'd been on a top secret mission. He could tell her about it, but then he'd have to kill her. His excuse worked for a very short period of time, until she realised that it was highly unlikely he'd come home from a mission smelling of alcohol and perfume and covered in lipstick. It was clear that my girlfriend was absolutely horrified. I'm not a very good liar, as I haven't had much practice, so I couldn't pretend that I was in the SAS. And anyway, it was my mate's wife who had introduced us. She knew everything about me, including that I was an above average, dyed-in-the-wool car salesman, not an elite, die-in-a-combat zone killing machine. She'd already warned my girlfriend not to get too attached to me, or she'd only end up being disappointed. After discovering my gun, my soon-to-be ex now thought that I was involved in the seedier side of the car business, and that I was some type of gangster. It was clear that she wasn't going to let the matter drop, forget about it, or think she'd been dreaming. So before I could go back to sleep myself, I had to explain everything in great detail. I began my story with, "You will laugh at this. It all started when I advertised my Rolex for sale." I was wrong, she didn't laugh. Would my story convince you? When I want something, I can't rest until I've got it. But when I've got it, I lose interest immediately, and I don't really want it anymore. I've always been the same. I'd saved every penny till I could afford to buy a Rolex. When I got it, after I'd worn it a few times, I didn't want it anymore. I scratched it on the garage doors at work the first day I got it, and the last straw was when I wore it on a night out into Preston with my mates. After last orders, I left to make my way home. I usually walk, which gave me a chance to get some fresh air and sober up a little. Although I was a bit tipsy, I noticed that a guy who had been staring at my wrist all night had followed me out of the pub at the same time. He either fancied me or he wanted my watch for himself. I could see his reflection in the shop windows. He was about 30 feet behind me, and I knew he was biding his time till he could jump me. I found myself hoping it was my watch he was after. I satisfied myself that he was actually following me and I wasn't being paranoid by going out of my way in the wrong direction, cutting up a side street, then doubling back on myself. He wasn't very good at following people. He mustn't have realised that I was onto him. He probably thought I was very drunk and I'd be easy prey. Ahead of me, I saw a shop called Pastimes, which was undergoing a refit. The builders had left all the bits which they'd ripped out of the shop on the floor outside. As I turned the corner, I saw a big piece of wood. I picked it up and I stood it up against the wall within arm's reach, just in case the guy was carrying a concealed weapon. And then I waited. I turned off the main road and onto a dimly lit side street. The would-be mugger realised that this would be his best chance to get me. He'd quickened his pace and he came round the corner, almost running. But he stopped dead in his tracks when he saw me waiting for him, steadying himself with his arms as he almost overbalanced and fell forward. He looked as though he was balancing and trying not to tip over the precipice of a cliff. I asked him if he'd got the time. The penny dropped and he realised I was onto him. It was time for him to get his ass out there. Let's just say he wasn't as keen to attack me from the front when he saw that I'd sobered up quickly and I was expecting it. It became clear to me that being able to tell the time in gold and diamonds was just asking for trouble. I was fed up of having the watch. It was a perpetual motion, self-winding model and would only self-wind due to the motion of your wrist. The state of people's driving in England meant that it was in constant danger of being overwhelmed when I was wearing it. I couldn't wear it to work as it would get ruined, and the conditions of my insurance specified that if it wasn't on my wrist, it had to be locked away in the safe, which coincidentally was where I kept my gun. Every time I took the bloody thing off for more than 12 hours, it'd stop, and then it'd take me at least half an hour to reset the day, the date and time. It was becoming too much aggravation. I'd bought a special box which actually had an electric motor that replicated the movement of your wrist and kept the watch wound. But it wouldn't fit in my safe when my gun was in there. It was just too much hassle. I didn't want the watch anymore, so I decided to sell it. A couple of days after the magazine that it was advertised in hit the newsagent's shelves, I got a call from a Liverpudlian. After qualifying him, sales speak for asking questions, I had a feeling that he wasn't being entirely honest with me. My heart sank. Here we go again, I thought. I realised that a prospective thief would also think that anyone stupid enough to spend that amount of money on a watch that just tells the time would more than likely have a few other valuable possessions. So instead of inviting him to my home, where he could possibly check out the security from inside, only to return later and rob me, I arranged to meet him at 2 o'clock the next day at the garage where I worked. I was waiting at the front of the showroom when he arrived, and although he said he was coming from Manchester, I'd seen him walking down the road, but there was no sign of a car. It just didn't seem right at all. It got worse. He had a mullet haircut. I didn't like him at all. I didn't believe a word he was saying and pretty much called him a liar. He probably thought that I was the world's worst salesman, and I finished my pitch by telling him that I'd been in the car job for a long time and had seen pretty much every scam and con there is, so if he was thinking of trying one on me, he would come off second best. I couldn't have made my mistrust any clearer, and anyone who wasn't a con man would have been insulted and told me where to stick my watch. I gave him every opportunity to abandon the con, which I suspected he was going to attempt, but he didn't. He was convinced that he could outsmart me, or he took my words as a challenge instead of a warning. The game was on. He just looked at my watch in the box, and I saw that he was careful not to touch it with his fingerprints. He was balancing it in his hand. He may as well have worn a stripy t-shirt, a mask and a bag with swag written on. I took my watch out of its presentation box and I handed it to him in a way that he couldn't refuse. Now I'd have his fingerprints too. He knew he would either have to buy back the evidence with real money or come up with a very convincing con. We agreed on a price and he went off to draw the cash out, saying that he'd return before the close of business. I walked with him to the front of the showroom and watched as he walked up the road. He kept turning around to see if I was still watching him. Every time he turned round, his stupid mullet hair swirled from side to side like the girl in the Harmony hairspray advert. That annoyed me even more than thinking he was trying to con me, so I walked back inside. But then when I was out of his sight, I ran round the back of the garage, jumped over the wall and watched him through gaps in our fence. When he was satisfied that I was no longer watching, I saw him signal to someone, Then a car pulled out of a pub car park up the road. There were 3 other occupants, and the guy who thought he was going to get a free Rolex got in the front seat. I could see they were all laughing as they drove away. I was laughing too as I wrote down the registration number. I'd now got fingerprints and his car registration number. I knew I had them banged to rights if they did try to con me. He didn't return that day, but about 4:30 p.m. he rang to say he was having trouble drawing out the money at the building society. They wouldn't release that amount of cash, which I knew was often the case, but they would give him a building society cheque, which is the same as a banker's draft, guaranteed funds, which would also be as good as cash, and it would be made out directly to me. I knew he was lying, but just to confirm my suspicions, I used an old pre-caller display salesman's trick. I told him that I was dealing with a customer in my office, so I'd need to call him back in a few minutes when I was finished. I asked him what telephone number he was calling from, and he wasn't expecting that. If he gave me the number, I would then have means to trace him. He lost his composure, clearly flustered. There was a silence, then he blurted out, I'm calling from a mate's house, and we're just going out. I'll call you back in 15 minutes. My bullshit detector jumped into the red. I now knew for definite that he was going to try and go through with his plan to con me. The phone rang 15 minutes later. There was no pips as the call connected, so he was still in the same place and not ringing from a call box. We had a quick chat. I played along with him and agreed to take a building society check, but I asked him what building society he used. We made arrangements for him to come and pick my watch up at 2 o'clock the next day. This would allow me to ring the branch from where the cheque was issued while they were still open and see if it was real. I was still clinging on to the slim hope that he was going to relieve me of my watch by paying for it with real money. As soon as I put the phone down, I rang the building society's head office. I explained that I thought someone was trying to defraud me, and the girl described in detail the size, colour, watermarks, and every detail of how the cheque should be printed, signed and countersigned. She also told me that a number of blank cheques had been stolen from one of their branches. At 2 o'clock I was ready and waiting. I telephoned the local police station to pre-warn them that I'd need their services. I'd primed our mechanic to be on standby and to make sure he got the make, model and registration number of the vehicle the buyer turned up in. But the buyer was a no-show. I thought he'd decided that it would be too risky to try and get one over on me, and he'd abandoned his plan. But at 5 o'clock, I was sat reading the paper when my office door opened, and in walked a guy who looked like he belonged on a wanted poster. He threw a brown envelope down on the desk and said, "I've come to pick the watch up for D," not his real name. I didn't like the first guy, but this guy was even more obnoxious. All the building society checks I'd ever been given before and been given since have been in good quality white self-seal envelopes, not thin cheap brown ones that required licking to stick it down. It was without doubt an attempted con, but it was amateur hour. When I tore open the envelope, the cheque looked genuine, but my name and the amount of money it was made out for looked like it had been done with a pen and a children's stencil set. It wasn't machine printed. I asked Mr. Mugshot to wait outside while I made a quick phone call. It was too late to ring the building society, but I didn't need to. Only a complete idiot would have been taken in by this pathetic forgery. It was obvious D didn't have a very high opinion of me, and it was going to cost him dearly. I put the cheque in our photocopier and printed off a couple of copies. Then I put it on the desk, picked the phone up and dialed the cops. As usual, the Walton Dale police weren't answering the phone, and I cursed them under my breath. Mr. Mugshot ran into the office. He said, "My girlfriend's pregnant, I've got to go." He grabbed the cheque and ran out of the showroom. Our mechanic followed him up the road to the pub car park and made a note of the registration number of the car. When the cops eventually answered, I gave them all the details. A few days later, I was contacted by the CID. It transpired that the gang had committed thousands and thousands of pounds worth of fraudulent transactions up and down the country, buying hard to trace high value watches and antiques using forged checks. Like the old joke, someone had stolen the toilet from a police station. A spokesman said at that moment the cops had nothing to go on. I was the only one who had a lead to the perpetrators. I had his fingerprints on my Rolex and I'd gotten the registration numbers of both the cars. All the other victims had let their valuables go and were just left with a forged check and an invoice with a fictitious name and address on. They couldn't even claim on their insurance as the items weren't stolen. They had willingly handed them over, and the only way they could pursue their monies was through a civil court. But they didn't know who to pursue. I was the only one who hadn't fallen for the con. The police set up surveillance on the cars that I'd identified, and pretty soon they apprehended all except one of the gang. He had managed to keep one step ahead of the posse and skip the country. I hadn't realised the scale of their operation or the number of criminals that were involved in the scam. I had severely pissed off the underworld. I can't be certain. I have some strange mates and they would go to unbelievable lengths and have done in the past to wind me up, but I'm assuming it was him who rang me a couple of nights later. I knew the caller was phoning from abroad by the beeps when I answered the phone. His message was simple and to the point. He said, "We know where you work. You're a fucking dead man." It was the first thing he said that had a ring of truth to it. Never been one to know when to keep my mouth shut or putting on a foreign accent and saying, "Sorry, I think you have the wrong number," I replied, "Don't say I didn't warn you. By the way, have you seen the new film Die Hard?" That's exactly what Hans Gruber, Alan Rickman, said to John McClane, Bruce Willis.
Do you really think you have a chance against us, Mr. Cowboy?
Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
And look how well that turned out for him.
What was it you said to me before? Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
Incidentally, Bruce Willis used a Beretta too in Die Hard. Just in case he ignored that warning too, I ran upstairs, got my Beretta out the safe, and I put it in my shoulder holster. Yep, it's official. I do watch too much TV. Thanks for watching me too. Bye bye. See you in the next video.